the murders of children that you hear about and the burying of babies happened on that at Cooper Island. And when that school, I grew up in California and I came back to Canada when I was 19. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to go back to the school just to check it out, to look at it and walk through it. And then to me it was the beginning of healing. And at 19 years old, I wasn't quite sure what that meant, but I just knew somehow I might feel better if I looked at the school. And but unfortunately, before I went to go look at the school, the people that lived on the island that attended the school, not attended to the school, but were forced to go to the school, tore the school down. The first thing that they did was broke the windows, and they just started tearing at the school once it closed down. And I think a lot of you know that there were just over about 150, and it's reported at 138 schools, but there is a lot more that people don't know about, and more day schools and residential schools. And and the ones there are quite a few on Vancouver Island, and all throughout BC, all throughout Canada. And so I didn't know. I thought that Cooper Island, where I went, was the only school. But after I left the school, my sister stayed behind. Well, we moved to California. She chose to stay with our father, and she got moved to a school in Port Alberni and a school in Mission. And I guess I might as well talk about. Like, I didn't want to. We were talking earlier, and not wanting to sort of repeat a lot of the things you've already heard, about residential school and the system. But I wanted to talk about, my own story a little bit. I'm a grandmother now, and every couple of years I go through more counseling. I attend my 10 sessions of counseling, and working on different issues, depending on whatever comes up for me. And like I've said before, I think a few that have heard me speak before, I always I feel compassion for my people that haven't worked on their issues or aren't able to. A lot of people talk about the women, but our men are very impacted as well. And my brothers attended the same school, and some of their experiences are very horrendous. And the two people that were in charge of their part were two men that were brothers. One who ended up getting charged, not at Cooper, but at another location where he worked at Kamloops. And what I'm passing around is one story. This was in 1998 of two people that were charged. So it's just a little bit of reality. Because the concept of, the residential school isn't a concept, or it's an idea or an ideology. It's something that real, that impacted our people. And, in relation to many other indigenous cultures and Euro-ethnic cultures in the Japanese community, the government is implicated in this genocide of people. And to me, that's a strong connection. And like she'd mentioned, how our people are working together. Right now, that's happening, where the Coast Salish people are working with the Japanese community. To talk about what's happened with our people in terms of the government and the racist legislation. And the residential schools were specifically, created to assimilate our people. And that's something that you hear all the time, and it's said so much it sounds cliche. But basically, when people came to this land, as you've heard, as you know, our people welcomed the people and helped them out. But as in time, it was shown, and they saw the value of the land and the resources, and our land and resources became the main factor. If you've read the article in here, and I really love this. It's very simple. This is our indigenous land. The Americas is what they're called, and this is Indian land, and that's something that I like to share when I introduce myself. Is that to us there are no borders. And the borders between provinces and between what's now called Canada and the United States is man-created borders. And I always believed that they were created to more effectively separate my people. And and the residential school system to me came because they couldn't access our lands, and because our leaders fought against the appropriation of our lands and the theft of our lands. And so what better avenue than to go towards the children and to break the bonds between families. In our cultures, our grandparents took over the charge of the children, teaching the children, and the aunts and uncles helped the parents, because it was felt that parents were too young and too immature to effectively raise a child without a lot of emotion. So there was a big shared teaching and parenting of children. When you see the posters that say raising a child takes a community, that's how we really lived. One of the things that you don't learn in the history books is the beautiful history of our people. Our people were very hardworking, and I'd like to share about my grandfather. My grandfather, it was like 5 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't even light out yet, and he'd be getting his boots on, and he'd be leaving to go and hunt and fish and get the fire on. And my grandmother was in her 80s, and she was still working, still cleaning fish, still knitting to make money for the family. I think you've probably learned that everyone in our communities, everyone had their roles. Even as kids, I remember we used to help with everything as well. And I traveled with my mother and my grandfather as a baby, and I had my little role to help out. But we come from a hard-working, subsistent, people, very humorous, very kind, hard-working. In our coast sailors' cultures, our language. One of the things that when you hear that we weren't allowed to speak our language, they took our language away from us. It's hard to empathize with that unless it happened to you. And and I appreciate. And I wanted to thank you guys for being here. That maybe wanting to understand. I'm not the best, and I'm not the. I don't know everything. I just know from my personal experience and what I've learned being an activist about how colonization and displacement of a people, genocide, how that impacted my people, and how the residential school system is another form of genocide against my people. And my mother went to the residential school. My mom was taken away from my grandfather and my grandmother, and then we were taken away. We had to go, and it's when they say, when you've read, where our people were kidnapped and taken away. A lot of times they were just playing outside or playing in the forest or picking berries, and the DIA agents or RCMP would come along and just take them. We were, when she talked about the dehumanizing of people, that was why things were allowed to happen to my people, because we were dehumanized. And the media spin worked with the governments back then to dehumanize us and how they described us. The word savages was a word that was used back then, and and uncivilized were words to describe us. And so it's easy for genocide, easy for kidnapping, easy for rapes, murder, all of that to happen to my people. And even today, the history that was written back then is something that's still alive in the souls and the minds of society. And in school today, even I went to Langara College at the post-secondary level. I was very happy to go back to school late in life. I quit school at grade 10, and a lot of our kids, on an offside, a lot of our kids leave school because of racism, but also because of their own issues, and that's sort of another sort of offshoot, I guess, of the impact of the residential school system, is how our parents feel about walking into an authoritarian building, and it's hard for our parents to support our kids because of the residential school impact. But now I forgot where I was going before that. You were listening. What was I saying?
I'm listening to you.
Pardon me? Oh, I went back to school. Thank you.
Thank you.
I left school because of one of the things that we have a problem with, the residential school survivors and our parents and grandparents, is that we're less than. Because one of the things that they strip away from you, besides your language, is your spirituality, who you are as a people. And we just feel very insecure, and we sort of think like they'll say things like, they've said things like, you know, you'll never amount to anything. You just can be like your parents, just, you know, like they demonize or devalue how our parents lived, you know, like they're fishermen. You're just gonna eat fish all your life. Like they would, you know, make fun of my parents, my grandparents, and how we lived. And so these are things that I didn't want to do growing up. And you know, moving on to school, they thought that was, you know, that was something that we wouldn't ever amount to. And so my mom has allowed me to share that I don't know. Growing up, things that I wanted to try, my mom would put it down. My mom would, you know, thought she was being careful for us, but she was repeating things that she'd heard. You won't be able to do that. Oh no, you should, you know. And she was always sort of stopping us from doing things. I wanted to play sports. I wanted to join the army. I wanted to become a dancer. I wanted to, and it seemed kind of silly to her. But she realized as an elder that these are things that she heard at the school, that you're never going to amount to this, you can't do that. And so it just stuck in her head that, and so I see a lot of our parents, you know, like doing the same thing. And how the kids are talked to at the residential school, or how they were talked to, it's like if you've probably read where, you know, if you spilled a glass of milk, you know, I've seen parents where you spill a glass of milk and, oh, it's okay, let's clean it up. But in the residential school, what's wrong with you? You go pick that up right now. And they'd grab you, and they'd grab you by the hair, and, you know, and it's very strong punishment for little things that you did wrong. If you didn't know how to do something, if you're too slow, and, you know, and I remember, you know, dealing with that. One of the things that I remember my mom doing was, if we didn't, we'd made sure the house was clean, but if we missed something, everything would go on to the floor. And I remember that, you know, somehow it didn't connect right away, but that used to happen at the school, where we'd have to, you know, do everything all over again. And so the connection didn't hit until I started, you know, until her and I started talking about what she went through and what we went through with her and at the school. And, you know, now my mom has been clean and sober now for about 20 years, and she's gone, you know, for counseling, and she's let us know that we should get help for ourselves. When she said that to me, it was an apology. Because at residential school, you don't get apologies. You don't get, oh, sorry, I had a bad day, you know, or sorry, I didn't know that you didn't do that. You know, you just get the punishment, and then you move on. Everything is supposed to be okay. But I guess I wanted to talk about that a little bit, just in my basic way, to say that a lot of our parents have trouble being parents because of what they've learned from their parents, or what they've learned, you know, by being at the school. Because you've heard that, you know, parents lost their roles, grandparents lost their roles, we lost our language. You come out having a foot in two doors, you don't, you know, and you come away being ashamed of your culture and your color. But what that means to the actual person, you know, is the only thing that I can come forward with is, you know, is my shame in being who I am, and my, you know, shame at, you know, my color and my culture and our language. And when they say take away our language, you've heard that they've punished our people for speaking their language, but what you don't really know is that our parents just spoke, and they were getting hit and punished, and needles in their tongue and soap, but they didn't know why. They didn't know what was going on, but it just took a long time for them to realize. They just thought that they couldn't talk, but it wasn't that they couldn't talk, it was that they couldn't speak their language. And, you know, so that it's become very cliche that they took away our language, but if you think about the actual child and kids being in this alien environment, away from their parents, and not being able to talk, you know, it's got to do something, and it's something that it's a big part of why I keep doing what I do, and to try to help people to understand a little bit about what our people have gone through. And no matter, I could talk for a couple of hours, that still wouldn't be enough to help people understand the impact of this genocide, of residential school, of colonization, of the reservation system. All of those systems were set in place simply to to create what you see today in our people, a people that are disenfranchised from their own culture and language, a people that are, don't think that they can amount to much, a people who can't start their own businesses because at the residential school system you're taught you can't do anything. You're not allowed to do this. Your people don't know how to do anything. But at the reservation system, that was something that wasn't allowed. You weren't allowed to make your own money. You weren't allowed to own businesses. You weren't allowed to even in the latter century, you weren't allowed to buy land. You weren't allowed to get a lawyer. You weren't allowed to vote. All of these things, that have a lot of similarities to a lot of other cultures. The African Canadian peoples, the Euro ethnic people, women. But it's like we as a people today are really sort of coming out of the struggle, but are really working hard to fix our people. And when you have to fix your people, a lot of times the government uses, again, the cost to Canadian taxpayers as a spin to why we shouldn't better ourselves. The spin that the residential schools were used to civilize and to educate our people, that Native people are children, that Native people are like little children that need our help, they need our protection. Those are spins, to say that it's okay that they put us onto the, to plunk us onto reservations and to the residential school system and take our kids away. These are, people need to realize that these are very intentional, very, how do you say, they were used to subjugate, our people, and even subjugate. To me, I love that word, but it's become cliche as well, but if I could just have you understand, to think of, the one child, to think of how it impacted, a little child. And, to look at our elders and our people on the street. Every time I talk about residential school, I ask people to remember, when you see people on the street, are people that are passed out, at the bus stop, walking the strip. You'll see not only Native people, you see a lot of people down there that all have been hurt, that have been, sexually assaulted, molested, abused, neglected. And, with our people, what I ask is that you at least see that there are the whys. There are why our people are down there. And, and that's just where the government wants all of us. My nephew talked about liquor stores and how he'd like to get rid of them all, and he's a little activist himself, and he's spoken at the homelessness rally downtown organized by the Anti-Poverty Committee and a few other groups, and I'm very proud of him. And what he wants to work on is the fact that he's only how old is he? He's 14 years old, and that there are a lot of liquor stores close to reserves, and liquor stores are government owned, and so it's it's like, as an activist, as an Indigenous person, as a Native person, you start to see everything as things with intent. But I just wanted to share that. Oh yeah, if you read this article, there's for this we are sorry, and it's written, and they specifically say, they're not Native people, but people ask about the apology and how we feel about it, and this is very, very, it's a very good article. And as an activist, as an Indigenous person, if I were to say that these residential schools were, like prisoner of war camps, I couldn't really say that, but they're saying that, because if I say it, it doesn't sound, it sounds more like I'm another Indian person complaining and whining and wow, like genocide, that's a Holocaust. No, it makes people upset, but the fact that they said that, I really appreciate that, because that's exactly what they were, because we were prisoners of war. And but it was a war done very politely on paper and with a political spin. And we are the survivors of a war against our people. A war that was done, yes, there were guns, yes, there was jail, yes, there were hangings of our people for leaving the reservation, yes, there were hangings of thumbs, of our people for leaving the reservation. And one of the things that a lot of people don't know is how our people, one of the things that upsets Canadian society is that our people are dependent people waiting for handouts. And why is that? Why can't your people finish school? Why aren't your people working? Why can't your people keep a job? Why aren't you getting educated? But if you know the impact of being prisoners and children of war against a people, then you would understand. If you understand that the reservation system is like an internment camp, it's like a prisoner of war camp, and if you understand that the reservations are not free land, like at the post-secondary level, one of the things that really upset me was I was so happy my grades were so high. I had 4.26 GPA, I had 4 A pluses and 3 A's, and I was at the Langara, like I got in with a 4 point whatever on the LPA, and I was so happy to be with other people that were wanting to educate themselves. And you know, my very first week of class, excuse me, well, what about Native people? Why can't, and I'm like, oh, you know, and then another class, well, you know, what about the Native people? What are we supposed to call them? First People, First Nations? They have so many names. I'm like, you know, and it's like, what about first, it was always, what about Native, or what about First Nations people? They have free land and they're still there now, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you know, but I found that, and I feel for a lot of our people that can't do what I do, because I can speak up. I'm like, oh, excuse me? Yeah. And so I educated people in class, and I couldn't believe it. I'm like, you know, I thought we were all going to be on an equal footing, but yeah, at the post-secondary level, what I've learned from other First Nation students at the university level is that they feel like they have to represent our people every day. You know, you have to work harder, you have to be there, you got to get there early, you got to get really good grades. But the problem is, when you do good grades and you have answer, then, you know, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't as a student, because, you know, they want you to be the one that they need to help. But if you don't need help, then, you know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know, it's quite frustrating, but we just keep going and we keep doing what we do. You know, they're First Nations student unions, thank the Creator. You know, I ran for the Langara First Nations representative on the student union, and I got in and I organized forums, especially around assumptions of privilege. You know, it's like we get the crumbs. You know, we are free, so-called free land. I mean, if you look at the map, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, and people complain about that. Free education, they don't understand that concept. Like things that were promised to our people in exchange for these little dots of land, when the government, you know, and their you know, now multinational global friends, you know, gain all the beautiful, like if you look at every reserve, you see all the beautiful houses right around there, you know what I mean? I mean, and big tracts of land, you know, and it's like you have to think about who, you know, historically owns those lands, you know, like, and how they ended up with these beautiful lands around the reservations. And, you know, like where I come from now is Valdez Island, and we don't even own that old island anymore. I don't even know how that happened. But, you know, Weyerhaeuser sold their lots, which belonged to our people, without our, you know, without our consent or consulting, which is how things happen. And you have to wonder about, like, how dismissive we are as a people to not be even considered, like, okay, well, you know, we're wanting to sell this land that we want, maybe this is your opportunity to have some land back. You know, no, it doesn't happen like that. So it's something to think about. It's something to think about, and how frustrating